Hello community, my name is Jerry, and I'm from the state of Mexico. I would like to share with you an experience that, whenever I recall it, I cannot find an explanation for, and I feel a very strange chill. When I tell this story, some people don't believe me and laugh. Some have even said that I must have been drunk. Others find it very strange but think I made it up just to scare them. But no. You see, I have a friend who is an artist, and his favorite hobby is making collectible figures of all kinds of themes and characters. The truth is that the dolls look excellent, but what really scares me a lot is what I saw them do. One afternoon, I went to my friend's house for the first time to pick up some things he sold me. I should mention that my friend is single and lives alone. He ended up separating from his family as he never got along with them. Upon entering his two-story house, I noticed that the entire interior was filled with his dolls, from the living room to the kitchen. And I'm not exaggerating, he even had these dolls in his bathroom. Afterward, he took me to where the things I would be taking were. At first, it all seemed a bit funny to me, but when I asked him why he had put so many dolls everywhere, I suggested he put them in a display case. But he said something that wiped the smile off my face. No, they don't like to be locked up. Besides, they help me cook and clean. That's why they are here, because I told them you were coming to visit me. They require a bit of extra love. I don't know how to explain it, but I clearly saw out of the corner of my eye how one of those dolls moved its head and could hear the joints creaking. I felt completely surrounded and watched. By this point, I already felt paralyzed. Suddenly, my friend told them, "Calm down. I already told you that Jir is a good and trustworthy friend of mine." I gathered all the strength I had and thanked him for everything. I took the items and said goodbye, and he walked me to the door. I also told him I couldn't stay for dinner because my wife was waiting for me. When I left my friend's house, curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to glance at one of the second-floor windows. And there, the curtains were moving. Those dolls were watching me. How could the curtains move by themselves if my friend was at the door saying goodbye to me? Moreover, when I arrived at his house, there was nothing in those windows. I don't really know how my friend makes those dolls. Perhaps it's better not to know. Good evening to everyone. Greetings from Guatemala. What I'm about to tell you is absolutely real. I don't know if it was something paranormal or if my mind is very deceptive, but I will tell it to you as I remember it. I spent my entire childhood with my mother, but we never had our own house. We always rented houses, and we moved frequently. This particular event happened in one of those houses. I don't remember the exact date, but it was several years ago. The house we moved into seemed normal at first. It was a two-story house with several rooms, and nothing seemed out of place. The previous tenant left a few things behind, including some old furniture and a few household items. My mother, her husband, and my brother were all excited about the move, but I felt a strange uneasiness from the very beginning. On the first day, I was left alone in the house for a moment while my mother, her husband, and my brother were moving things from the previous house. During that time, I felt a heavy atmosphere. I wouldn't say it terrified me, but I did feel a certain discomfort. Months passed and we had settled into the house. Up until that moment, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. However, one night I had my first experience with sleep paralysis, and it was the worst I've had to date. I went to bed as usual, and I tend to sleep almost face down. For some reason, I was dreaming that I saw a white object in the sky, but my dream was monochromatic, something that had never happened to me before. Additionally, there was absolute silence. Suddenly, a loud noise started and I woke up abruptly. However, I couldn't move, even though the noise was still there. These sounds were multiple voices, like children laughing strangely. But it wasn't just that. I could feel them climbing and jumping on my bed, running around the room. Above all, I felt many hands on my back, pushing me against the bed as if trying to bother or sink me into it. This lasted for a while. I felt it was minutes of these children or things or whatever they were, bothering me in the dark of early morning. I must mention that I couldn't open my eyes due to the terror that the situation caused me. I only did it approximately an hour after everything ended. At that moment, I could move my body, but because of the shock, I stayed lying there, completely terrified. I was lucky to have a TV with a remote control in my room, and the control was under my pillow. It was very hard to slide my hand out from under the sheet to grab the remote and turn on the TV. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed awake until I finally saw the daylight. I've told this story to many people, and each one gives me their perception. Some say they were goblins and others say they were demons. I try to convince myself that it was simply my mind, but I still have that doubt. This wasn't the only sleep paralysis I had in that house. I suffered many more, though they weren't as intense as the first one. Fortunately, I now know how to control them. Still, there are some things that happened in that house that might not be related to sleep paralysis, but could be connected to what happened that night. Good morning, community. I've been a follower for a few months now, and I never get tired of listening to people's stories. I would like to share one in particular that happened to me after my maternal grandmother passed away. I lost my grandmother 11 years ago. She was a very sociable woman and a lover of life. She used to take care of me at her house when I was little, and we had a lot of fun playing together. Unfortunately, one Saturday night everything changed. My parents received a call from a man claiming to be with my grandmother at her house. She had gone out to buy some things and started to feel unwell, so he kindly accompanied her home in a taxi. It was then that this man called us to inform us of her condition. It took us about 20 minutes to get to my grandmother's house because we lived a bit far away. When we arrived, that man was no longer there. My father and mother got out of the car and told me to stay in the car. I should have listened to them. While I was in the car, I heard a scream from my mother and I got very scared. Quickly, I ran into the house where I saw my grandmother dying on her couch, the same one we used to watch television on. I was in shock witnessing that grotesque scene while my parents tried to lift my grandmother to take her to the hospital. We arrived at the hospital and my parents told me to stay in the car. My father gave me his cell phone to entertain myself for a while and to help me forget a bit about what was happening. It was around 1 a.m. when we got to the hospital. I was calmly playing a video game on my father's cell phone when I started to feel like someone was watching me from afar. I looked in all directions, but there was no one. I didn't give it much importance until I felt that horrible sensation again. Looking toward one of the windows on the upper floor of the hospital, I saw her. It was my grandmother trying to tell me something with her hand, making a gesture as if she was saying goodbye to me. I was very happy thinking that my grandmother was okay, and I wish it had been true. 5 minutes later, I saw my uncles and my parents come out of the hospital crying. A bit confused, I got out of the car to ask what had happened, and they gave me the saddest news of my life. My grandmother had passed away 30 minutes earlier. I tried to explain how it was possible if I had seen her waving to me from that very window a few minutes before. I told them about it, and they were very surprised. The next day, we went back to my grandmother's house to look for some belongings of an uncle. I went with my father, and while I was in the living room, on the same couch where my grandmother had died the night before, I saw out of the corner of my eye a red silhouette pass into the next room, my grandmother's room. I assumed it was my father who had found some piece of clothing or object, so I didn't give it much importance and continued playing. Minutes later, my father called me and told me he had found what he was looking for. I asked him why he had gone into my grandmother's room. He looked very surprised, and I saw an expression of anguish and fear on his face at the same time. I asked him what was wrong and why he was making that face, and he replied that he had not entered that room. So, I assumed it was my grandmother I had seen. Currently, my unmarried uncle lives alone in that house, and he has mentioned that strange things have happened since my grandmother's death. In 2021, a neighbor told my uncle that around 4 a.m., when he came home from work, he saw a woman with blonde hair in my grandmother's garage. When the neighbor noticed my uncle's neighbor arriving, the mysterious woman hid and retreated towards the back. The neighbor assumed it was my mother because she used to go to the house to sleep some days. My uncle was surprised to hear that since my grandmother was blonde and didn't like people seeing her in her garage. This is my story. I don't know if it was a 100% paranormal experience. It was something that marked me for a long time and brings back nostalgia. I wanted to share it with someone. Greetings to the whole community. Hello, the dark side. My name is Cynthia, and I want to share with you and your audience an experience that was very intense for me, especially because I was a child when it happened, and to this day, I remember it clearly. I've always had a certain sensitivity to these kinds of things since I was very young, and what I'm about to tell you happened when I was between 12 and 13 years old. From that moment, I began to experience these types of occurrences. The house where I lived with my parents and my brother had 2 floors. My parents had their bedroom on the upper floor, as did my brother, while I slept alone downstairs. It's worth noting that the days leading up to what happened to me were completely normal, until everything started. I remember I was invited to a friend's birthday party, which coincided with Halloween night. I attended the party and had a great time. I left around 10 p.m., got home, and notified my parents, who were already in their room. Since it was the weekend and I didn't have to go to school the next day, I sat down to watch TV with my brother, who was in the living room. I got bored of what we were watching and decided to play with a ball we had in the living room. My brother came over and told me to stop bouncing the ball, warning me about something. At that moment, I thought he just wanted to scare me so I would stop making noise with the ball. A while later, he went to bed, and I also went to my room. I put on my pajamas and placed my sandals together beside the bed. As usual, everything was normal, but just as I was about to fall asleep, I started to hear the ball bouncing by itself in the living room where I had left it. My heart immediately started racing because I knew no one else was downstairs. Even so, I got up, thinking maybe my brother wanted to scare me. I opened the door of my room that connected to a hallway leading to the living room, and there at the end, I saw the ball bouncing by itself, moving down the hallway towards me. At that moment, I felt my legs buckle. I shut the door and ran back to my bed, covering myself from head to toe with the sheet, and I stopped hearing the ball. Eventually, I fell asleep. But that was the first of many nights that turned into a horror movie. I couldn't sleep because every night something manifested, making me endure the worst nights of my life. I didn't tell anyone what happened the first night with the ball, and the following weeks passed similarly. The next night, after leaving my sandals beside my bed and falling asleep, I was awakened by a loud noise, as if something had hit the floor. I opened my eyes expecting to see what it was, and it happened again. Immediately, I turned on the light and saw my sandals were on opposite sides of the room, as if someone had grabbed them and thrown them with anger. I picked them up again and placed them near my bed, turned off the light, but left a lamp on my nightstand on. Lying in bed, I started hearing noises as if something was under my bed. I could hear the sounds, but I didn't look to see what it was because I didn't want to see something unpleasant. This went on for about 3 or 4 weeks, with noises waking me up every night, things slamming, pulling my sheet or hair. That's why to this day I don't sleep with my hair down. Every night, starting from 2 or 3 a.m., I couldn't sleep and just waited, paralyzed by fear for it to get light so I could prepare for school. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and tearfully told my mother what was happening to me every night. Although she didn't believe me much at first, as usually happens, she said it was just my imagination. She asked my brother to stay with me so I would feel more at ease. My brother, who is 4 years older than me, stayed in my room that night, which made me feel somewhat relieved despite still being anxious about what might happen. Everything was fine, but the following night, already asleep as I tried to change positions, I felt something on my neck. I passed my hands over it to identify what it was and felt something wet, like a soaked rag around my neck. I immediately took it off and threw it to the side of the bed. My heart was pounding, and at that very moment, something grabbed it again and threw it in my face with rage. I got up, terrified, running to turn on the light, but of course there was nothing there. My brother was sound asleep, unaware that anything had happened. I just tried to calm down, lay down again, and waited for morning to come. That same early morning just before dawn, I was waiting for my alarm to go off to get ready for school. In my room, I had one of those woven iron chairs, and out of nowhere, I saw it dragging itself toward me. At that moment, my brother was waking up and saw it too. Almost accustomed to it, I just turned to him as if to say, "Now they'll believe me." My brother got up running and took me out of there completely scared. He went straight to my parents and told them what had happened in my room. Fortunately, that was the last day I suffered any paranormal activity in my room. I continued sleeping with my brother until, over time, we left behind what had happened. But I will always have many questions about what happened in my room. What was there making my nights unbearable? It terrifies me to think it was a demon, but I'm glad it's gone. I hope it stays that way. Hello, the dark side. Good afternoon. I'm a big fan of your channel and always listen to your stories on YouTube. The story I have for you involves that mysterious sixth sense attributed to those born in October and November, a belief that always seemed more folkloric than real to me. I don't know if this can be true, but I can confirm it. I was born on November 4th, and my mother tells me that since I was a child, I have always been able to communicate with the dead, mainly with my grandmother. I always saw her in one of the rooms, either sleeping or doing laundry. Sometimes I would fall asleep and feel as if something was leaving my body and traveling around the house. One of those times I remember waking up, looking out the window and seeing my mother and grandmother sitting and talking. Then I woke up from that dream and did the same thing as Nellie. To my surprise, they were sitting and talking, wearing the same clothes I had dreamed of. I have had the misfortune of dreaming about things that later happen. I dreamed of a man in a sewer, and the next day my uncle had an accident where his foot got trapped in the sewer, and they had to free him. I have also dreamed of dead people who always tell me their story of how they lived and what caused their death. Additionally, my dreams have taken me to places I do not know, but when I travel and see photos, I know those are the places I have dreamed of. The point of this is that a few months ago I dreamed that I was coming from a party with some high school classmates I hadn't seen in years. We were a bit drunk, to be honest, but since I train in self-defense, I was more alert as it was early morning. I remember crossing the road first to make sure it was safe, and to walk calmly while they waited to cross. I felt something behind me, turned around, and saw a tall, thin shadow about 50 meters away, leaning against a tree near an abandoned house. Although in my dream, the house was intact without any damage. I turned towards my classmates and shouted for them to hurry. But as soon as I turned back, that thing was getting closer to me. I got desperate and yelled at them to cross the road, but when they got to the other side, that thing was behind me. We immediately ran to my aunt's house, which was next to that abandoned house. But what I didn't expect was that thing followed us to my aunt's house and just watched me. I still remember its clothes. That thing wanted to take me with it, or maybe ask for help, because I remember it was desperate to take me with it. I finally woke up from that nightmare and couldn't sleep well for days, feeling like something was watching me. A few days later, talking with that same aunt and my cousin at their house, they mentioned a man who had appeared to him in the same place. I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me about that house. I asked which house, and they described the same house I had dreamed of, only now abandoned. I told them about my dream, and she asked me what the man I dreamed of looked like. She asked if he was tall and thin, to which I immediately said yes. What she told me still makes my heart race when I remember it. Many years ago, that man had committed suicide in that house. He hung himself from the same tree I dreamed of. Sadly, I have always heard that people who commit suicide never rest in peace. Another event that seems like a big coincidence but also happened a week ago was that I went to a party, and thanks to this party, I reconnected with the classmates from my dream, and we started talking again. All three of us got drunk just like in the dream. I don't know if it's a coincidence or if that dream was telling me something about my future with them or something like that. Honestly, I'm not a religious person, but I am very spiritual. Even so, I try to burn some incense and other herbs for protection when I feel watched, and I clean my room to stop thinking about it. But of all the dreams I've had, that one impacted me the most. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know if anyone else in the community has these kinds of dreams or a sixth sense like mine.